Chief Design Officer at Nested Knowledge. I'm here with Ranita. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Ranita Tarchand, Director of Implementation and Client Success here at Nested Knowledge.
I did promise everybody a surprise guest, and we had a little kerfluffle this week, so we didn't get that surprise guest. I don't know if I can talk about this. I suppose I can. It's almost set in stone. We're going to try to have Greg Martin on. We've worked with him in the past. He has an amazing YouTube channel, which you can go check out very soon. But we are, in the coming weeks here, more details to come soon. We are going to try to have him on so that he can talk about his experience in our software. Because he is a user of Nested Knowledge as well. Today, we are going to get into some of the common misconceptions that people might have when coming into the Nested Knowledge platform and starting to use our tool for the first time. We want to dispel some of those misconceptions, further explain some of those misconceptions, and see what we can do to help you get started in the software today. And of course, we will be taking your questions, should there be any. So, yeah, I want to get into those questions in just a second, but I have a fun question for you, Ranita. Just let's just go with me here for a second. It's just a little bit of an icebreaker. If Nested Knowledge were a boy band, right? Boy bands have this. So you think about like Justin Bieber, Beliebers, right? They have their fan base has a name, okay? One Direction, Directioners, right? What would the Nested Knowledge fan base be called were we a boy band? What do you think? I got my answer, but I want you to tell me your answer first.
So I love our users, Jeff. I talk to them all the time. I'm here for them, to support them, and I have to say, I myself was a directioner.
Were you?
Yeah, pretty strong. Pretty strong.
It's a little embarrassing to admit publicly online, but okay.
Yep. Of course it is. But that's the humility I'm willing to admit to here. But I have to say I've never given this a thought. I'm not sure.
Okay, that's my answer. Maybe this is stupid, and obviously it's weird if the company or the boy band tries to foist that onto the audience. Nesties, like besties, but nesties. Okay. Let's get into some real questions now. Let's transition out. I'm sorry, this is embarrassing. Let's just move on. Let's talk about some of the I think the main misconceptions that people have when they first join our platform, when they first sign up, and what are they? I think first of all, the first one is screening is automatic, and we can probably broaden that question a little bit. Screening, tagging, data extraction, autolit in general is automatic or automated or uses AI or machine learning in some way, shape, or form to do that task for you. This is a misconception. That's not totally true. Tell me a little bit more about why that is, though.
Yeah, of course. So right now in Nested Knowledge, we get this question all the time, and I think a lot of people in the industry are really curious to see, is there potential for an AI to take off some of the burden of screening? Can we do something like a bit of a dual screening where a robot does one half and then a human does the other half, and then a third party adjudicates? I think that's a really common question. There's a lot of curiosity, as there should be, right? Like, we're always looking to see, like, what are the frontiers of technology? Where does research, how can it be expanded based on not just where our human intellect, begins and ends, but is there any capability to make this thing faster? Can we do lit reviews more precise, maybe? And I will say right now in Nested Knowledge, we don't support, any sort of AI screening, but that doesn't mean that isn't to come. We do have a what we like to call our inclusion probability calculator, which is an AI. It will build a model for you as you go through your screening. You can then, as you screen each record, the model will be trained, and you can actually train the model as you go, and it'll rank them based on the inclusion probability it calculates based on that model. So you can imagine that as you screen more studies, the model becomes more accurate, and it makes a better prediction for you and is able to show, these studies should be are most likely to be included, and therefore maybe you want to pay more attention to those ones. there are other ways in nest knowledge you can kind of hack around, as our CTO likes to call it, where you can actually do some of these things based on like a bulk exclusion. So maybe you want to say, okay, all these inclusion probabilities are really low. The model seems to be really good because we've screened a lot of studies. Maybe we want to go and exclude those as a bulk action. So we do have some capabilities surrounding that, but as of right now, like I said, we don't have the ability to have anybody other than a human screen those records.
Right. For good reason. I mean, for the most part, good reason. And I think in designing the software, we have been very careful, I think is the right way to think about it, to not introduce too much automation without human oversight. There are, like you're mentioning, there are some features within our software that are always totally optional. They're sort of augmentations. They are artificial intelligence or machine learning or natural language processing, something along those lines. Another good example would be when you're screening or when you're tagging, we have our RoboPico mode where you turn on the switch and you can get automatic highlights of particular things within our software. And that is based upon a natural language processing engine. But those are optional features that are added onto nested knowledge, and they are not ever making decisions for you. Unless, of course, you do something hacky and you work around it using Study Inspector and those sorts of things. And if you're interested enough in that, if anybody out there is interested in that, we can certainly demonstrate that or show you how that works. But for the most part, we don't recommend that. Because this software was built on the recommendations of experts that we consulted. So we've talked at great length and worked with the ECRI Institute to design many of our features, design many of our kind of our workflows, so that everyone is always doing the best possible, highest quality research, right? And oftentimes that is a really manual process still because we don't necessarily trust artificial intelligence and machine learning to make decisions for us. Whenever a black box like that is making decisions, you have to wonder, right? How did you arrive at that outcome? Even if it is correct, that's a little bit scary. And a huge part of the clinical researcher's job is to be able to show your work. And that's for compliance purposes, but it's also just great science, right?
That's exactly right, Jeff. And I did mention, there is a lot of interest in the industry to go towards AI, but I think there's also a lot of skepticism as well. How would you maybe mention that in a manuscript, right? Like you've got author one, and you've got author two, and then you've got third author that's maybe a cyborg or something like that. It can be a little. I think there's still much left to be explored there before we're ready to implement like some of those capabilities.
Yep. But keep the requests coming. If you have ideas about how to use our software or what we could add to it in order to make your life easier, we want to hear about it, of course. And I think we are interested in that. And we're not ruling that out. I think we need to mention this. We're not ruling out adding on these tools, but we would do so always very carefully, very meticulously, so as to never eliminate human oversight and never eliminate your ability to see into that decision-making process were any of those decisions to be automated, even optionally, right? Let's dispel another myth here. So hierarchy, so that we're talking about the tagging hierarchy, right? Our tagging feature pre-populates based on data mining the papers. I think this is another automation questions, but basically like, okay, the fact that we have RoboPico is super nice. It highlights those patient intervention comparators and those outcomes in the text in the abstract for you. However, I think a lot of people misunderstand this. They think that information is automatically kind of assimilated into a tagging hierarchy, and that's what creates a tagging hierarchy. Not true. Why is that, Ranita? Tell me a little bit more why that is.
So I think I'll actually share my screen for this question,
Sure.
mostly because I think a lot of people know that one of my favorite features on the site is actually the configure study tags page. So I'm in our COVID-19 RCTs nest, and we can see this hierarchy. It looks, it's really pretty. It's got all the nice colors here to, designate what's the independent variable and what are the dependent variables. What do we have listed as our data elements here? Those are in yellow. We've got our purple nodes here to designate the intervention or the independent variable. And I think a lot of this, why we couldn't necessarily mine the papers in order to build this, is because in order to do that, it would have to make a decision based on, what is the researcher really trying to answer? Like, what is the research question? And when we think about what the hierarchy is, right? So what we've got up here are population, intervention, outcomes, our comparators. Those are really getting at the research design, right? The PICO. When we would want to build this hierarchy, we want to think about what are we actually trying to collect for this paper? What are we trying to analyze, whether that's for a systematic literature review, a meta-analysis, a cost-effectiveness, paper, or any other type of maybe CER document or dossier you're trying to produce. And if we had let's say a natural language processing AI go through those papers to look for keywords, I think a lot would be I think this hierarchy would be a lot bigger, first of all, just
Right.
because, you would have to kind of see what's being reported in the papers and maybe designate what you'd be interested in collecting. And then the vocabulary within the papers is quite varied. But you'd also have to think about, how is hypertension reported across different papers? I think that's a pretty simple one. Usually it'll be just a percentage or, a count of how many people experience hypertension. Things like age, as that's a lot harder. Age could be a mean, a median, or something like mortality can have multiple time points across different papers. And so the hierarchy must be configured by the actual researcher just to decide, what am I actually trying to study here? So what are my interventions of interest? What comorbidities or what kind of baseline characteristics or outcomes am I, interested in investigating? And then how do I actually want to report them for my analysis? So that's a matter of configuring each one of these, yellow data elements to report a variable based on your configuration. And that's eventually going to, have an impact on how the meta-analysis is performed and, what outcomes you end up reporting. So that's I hope that makes sense and about the tagging hierarchy, but it is configured by just creating each node. So going here, creating each tag, and then creating the subsequent tags underneath. And we also have the ability to import a hierarchy if you're part of an organization. And so, let's say we built this one and it looks great, and we want to use the same template across our different studies. We can go ahead and import this hierarchy into another nest and begin with this foundation.
Yeah, you said something really important. The tagging hierarchy might be too big, right? So it might, if we were to do something like that, you have to imagine like, okay, what might go wrong with that? That's always the question. When the stakes are high, and they almost always are in clinical research, right? So what happens if you let a machine make those sorts of decisions? Because essentially what we're talking about is your study design. This is one of the ways that you express what you're gathering. In other words, how you're designing your systematic review. If we were to allow a machine to do that, you might end up with a very large tagging hierarchy. Of course, AI is somewhat flexible. I'm sure on the back end, we could come up with ways to limit the number of tags that it creates, maybe based on some arbitrary number that we kind of pick out of thin air, right? But then, of course, then you're missing out maybe on some really important things that you might have otherwise wanted to gather were you to try to create this thing yourself. And those are just kind of the high level concerns. Obviously, every field of medicine might have a slightly different concern. If we were to just blanket statement, here's AI to do this particular task. Look, the tagging hierarchy is part of its inherent strength is its flexibility, but believe it or not, also its manual configuration. The fact that you are making decisions on each and every one of those tags is actually a strength, and not so much of a deficit, because every tagging decision that you make is basically your brain as a researcher, your expert opinion being placed into that study design, right?
And I do think, like, if you were going to go about the traditional method of doing research and making that nice Excel sheet, or that very large Excel sheet that you typically make if you were doing this by hand, I think one of the things that's nice about having a hierarchy is that it's the organization, right? Like, if you're really trying to, make your outcomes are known, or trying to separate out each paper, or trying to separate out each element of a population, or an outcome or an intervention. I think it's really nice how this is structured. I think it helps you keep track. And then you can really clearly see, like, how many elements are we really trying to collect here? This one, in my opinion, is actually a little large. I would maybe, if we were to do this again, maybe we'd cut it down a little bit, just because, the less variables sometimes that you have, the more specific your paper ends up being. And so that's just my little note about the design.
Yeah. Let's move things along. Next question. So I think there's oftentimes some confusion. Again, this is sort of about automation, a little bit different though. It's more so about just what you think you can use. So the misconception is you can just use the outputted analysis and write up a manuscript without consulting a statistician, right? So you gather your data using data extraction. You start writing your manuscript without talking to a statistician.
So
True? Not true? Right?
I would say, for the most part, not true. Just because, so if we go to synthesis here and we take a look at the quantitative synthesis, and hopefully we'll be able to get John, our resident biostatistician, on here at some point to talk you through what goes into the statistics of a meta-analysis. But when we look at this quantitative synthesis, we have some really great tools here to be able to see, what's the confidence interval, what is the percentage. You can do some kind of preliminary analysis to see how are things landing. Same thing with our distribution. We can kind of see where our outliers. So if there's any studies that are falling way out, we can say, okay, what's going on with Arabi over here? He's falling way out of line from everybody else. We can go in and see, okay, why might that be the cause of that. We've also got our network meta-analysis here, and we can go ahead and look at different things. So we look at our antivirals of interest. We've got them all listed here. We can take a look at one of these and see, of course, I'm going to have to find one that has enough studies to make a comparison. But here we've got our Sucre ranking and forest plot based on the different interventions here. And all the outputs that I just showed are going to be based on the extraction that you've done within the nest. When you're planning to do that analysis, and you're wanting to do an analysis, there are a lot of things that go into that are not present within the software. So, if you're doing like, an I-squared or heterogeneity test based on your risk of bias, you're going to want to actually meet with a statistician to talk about how you can get that done, and performing the analysis, as well as any subgroup analyses that you might want to perform. So, between different drugs, or between different maybe things like our baseline characteristics, or different subsets of the population. So for all of those different things, you're really going to want to meet with a statistician, and you'll want to provide them with the spreadsheet that we actually are automatically produced. And so if we go to export and we download all the extracted data from here, we're able to get all of those different extractions that have been made over all the different studies, and a very nice analysis can be performed using, for us, we use the R meta package, but you can feel free to use things like Stata, or even Python has a meta-analysis package, and perform your meta-analysis portion that way.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Again, let's talk about literature search, right? So there's a couple different ones that I think are interesting about literature search. Oftentimes people get confused or just wonder, like, why is this different, or why does this look this way? I think there's some confusion around what our literature search will search. In other words, does it search full text? Does it search abstracts? Does it search PubMed? Why does my PubMed search look different when I input it into NK versus when I input it directly into PubMed? .org. Right. Why is that? Why is that, Ranita? Let's talk a little bit about searches. How do they work at NK, and what gives?
Yeah, of course. And I think, Jeff, you actually have an update as well about that, but I'll get
I
into
do.
the
I
actual
do. I do.
search.
I'm just posing the question, getting it out there.
Perfect. Great setup. I'll hit it back to you in just a second. And so when we go to add a search here, we can enter our query as we typically would in PubMed. If you want to include filters or any of those like filter statements, you can also do that within this query right here. And so when we're able to actually perform a search in PubMed, it'll give us the results right here. So it'll say how many it should be. And sometimes there are discrepancies within those numbers just because of the API that Nested Knowledge runs on. And so if that is the case, I recommend usually using like going into PubMed and using the advanced query string. And so you'll be able to see that in the advanced option in PubMed. I would cut and paste that, and usually the results are much more accurate. If you're not able to get an accurate string that way, I recommend doing a file import of just an RIS or an mbib file. You'll be able to do that in the file import tab right here. And of course, you can designate the search engine and upload the RIS or mbib file from here.
Right. Maybe one of the ways to think about it is like, what's the difference between automatic and file import? So automatic means we have an API, and if there's a developer in the audience, they might cringe, but this is the way I describe an API. API is sort of like a bridge between two different pieces of software so that they can interact with one another and talk to one another. PubMed has an API. Nested Knowledge uses that API to call out to PubMed and return search results. PubMed's API is currently like a legacy API, and they have a new API that's coming out that has some of these more advanced term mapping features that you might be enjoying over on the actual PubMed site. That new API is, I believe, now released, and Carl, our development team, is working hard to implement that. So we're hoping to have that up soon and finished soon so that our results will be the same as what you would find on PubMed versus on our site. They will be identical results because, there'll be no discrepancy in terms of what the API can deliver versus what the native site experience is. But yeah, the main piece of this that you have to understand when you're coming into our software is that we have APIs for some things. We do not have APIs to call out to every database. Sometimes that's because that database doesn't have an API. Sometimes it's because that database is paid. Various reasons for why that API, we might not be able to return results for you automatically. However, file import is the fallback option. So automatic searches, they're API based. We are calling out to some other database in order to return your results. And we can update that search on the date of your choosing. So you can have a monthly search that calls out to PubMed, calls out to any of the ones that we have an API for, and will return those results on a monthly basis, effectively allowing you to conduct a living review. Because then you can screen those records, you can tag those records, etc. File import, you have to manually update. It's sort of a one-time thing. You import those records via file import, and then they are inside of your nest, and you can use them. But if you ever wanted to manually update that search again, you'd have to go back into that tab. You'd have to create a new search. You'd have to do it all over again to import those new results. Did I miss anything, Ranita?
I don't think so. So that's actually a really good description of how I would go about updating those searches if you do it in a file import. Don't worry about having to rescreen any records or anything like that. As soon as you upload the RAS or the mbib file with the updated records, it'll automatically duplicate for you and provide the same results as if it ran automatically.
I have one more fun update about search, but I'm going to hold on to it because we have one more question. And we're going to try to keep it to a tight half hour here because it's just me and Ranita on today. But I've got one more question for you, Ranita. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Relationship between dendrogram and sunburst. What
Great.
is it? Is there one? What are we talking about here?
Yes, and these sound like made up words, almost like out of a fantasy novel.
It does.
But let's take a look at our beautiful sunburst diagram that you see in a lot of our marketing materials and our page, and is very classically, an icon of nested knowledge. So here is our sunburst, and when we look at this, we get a lot of questions about, how is this created, who creates this, and then, how does it all fit together? And what I like to say about the sunburst is that you can think about it as different visualization of your hierarchy. So if you pay attention to these nodes up here, like our study type, population, intervention, and outcomes, you'll see that these top parent nodes up here are actually the exact same as our inner circle right here. So same population, intervention, outcomes. And so when we build this tagging hierarchy and we go in and tag the studies for qualitative information, so maybe we're interested in looking at how do all the studies report like the dosage of a drug, in words, how is something discussed, how is something, reported or phrased within a text, and those will be our qualitative tags, and that's actually what the Sunburst will be made of. So any tag that's applied to a study, for example, let's look at maybe open label randomized control trials, we'll see that there's 21 studies associated with that tag. Open label is very much something that I would expect to be a qualitative, qualitative element, just because, how would you put that as a data element? It's going to be something that's mentioned in the text about how they, randomized. So we can see that for this study, they looked at single label or single center open label randomized control trial. We can look through a few of them and see how this was actually mentioned in text. But that's really the relationship here. It's a matter of what was qualitatively applied tag and what did a researcher maybe go in and include as like the text fragment or the comment for that tag.
Awesome.
Any further questions about this? I really like explaining this just because I think it gets into a lot of the difference between, why would you make something qualitative and why would you make something quantitative? Of course, if we want to make something qualitative, it means we want to extract numbers from it. And so, some of these are going to be inherently qualitative in nature.
Yeah, no, I think you've done a great job explaining that. So yeah, I think that about wraps up some of the misconceptions that people have. If you have questions, though, and we're running a little bit out of time, but if you have a question right now, type it into the chat, and I will do our best to answer it in the next few minutes or so. I just want to take a second too to talk through and kind of shamelessly plug our Nolt board. So Nolt is the way that we kind of request your feedback. We want your feedback, and actually we base all of our development decisions as to what features we are going to build next on your feedback. And so you can go to our support page. It's just go to about.nested-knowledge.com/support, and then you can go on there and you can leave us feedback right from that link in that support page. And we do look at that feedback. You can upvote other people's ideas on that board. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to show you some of our top rated ideas in the past little bit here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about their status and where we're at with them, because it does take us time, obviously, to develop things. We are a small team. So it does take us a little bit, but we are trying to crank out as many of these user requested features as possible in as short a time as possible, without sacrificing their quality, of course. The top rated, most asked for feature right now is a clinicaltrials.gov integration. That's this one right here. We are working on that integration right now. So I believe it's currently in the spec stage. So it's a little early yet. Kevin, our CEO, is drafting up a spec for that. It's looking really good. We have some really good ideas about how to make sure that integration flows seamlessly into our software and that you are able to use that data in the way that you want to. You can think of it almost as a way to kind of get a head start and know what's coming down the pike, so to speak, in terms of clinical trials and that type of data, so that you can get a jump start, get a head start on a systematic review for that particular, whatever space you're interested in, right? So that's going to be very cool. We're working on that feature, and it's more than planned. It's actually, I should update this. It's in progress. We're working on it. We're working towards a solution there. Zoomable.
That's a really interesting and exciting one for all of our great nature fans out there.
Yep. Yeah. We're excited about that integration too. I think it's going to be pretty great. Very useful, I would imagine. I hope so. It's certainly been voted highly. It has 11 upvotes. So if you want that one, drop in an upvote and we'll prioritize it more. It's already at the top of the list. I don't know what else I can tell you. Anyway, it's cool. Zoomable sunburst diagram. So sunburst is that thing that Ranita was just telling you. It actually, you can zoom in on it. I think the better way to phrase this question is like, can you pick a segment of the sunburst and then focus the analysis around just that particular segment and maybe its children? So think about a dendrogram, right? It turns into the sunburst. It sort of wraps itself up into that sunburst. What if you could pick a particular node, whether it's top of the hierarchy, a parent node at the very highest order, or maybe it's a little further down, it's one of those children. That becomes the new primary parent node, and everything else around it reorganizes. That's the request. We're working on it. I have a design in progress. And actually, we are developing some really interesting features that we're sort of, at least colloquially, I can't say that word, never mind. We're calling it behind the scenes, we're calling it insights. So we want to create a way that you can kind of take a look at either qualitative synthesis, quantitative synthesis, and you can save particular views and maybe even annotate them a little bit so that you can kind of show two comparisons side by side, or you can show a smaller version of the sunburst. Even though you gathered a ton of other data, maybe you don't care about that other data for that particular instance and you want to just highlight a particular intervention or outcome or whatever, right? We're working on some features around that. So stay tuned for that sort of stuff. Dual extraction, dual data extraction, data QC. Dual data extraction is very close to being done. I am told by my good friend Steven on the dev team that he is finishing up some of those things, hopefully this week before he goes on vacation. If not, it'll have to be very soon after that when he returns from Hawaii. But yeah, it's looking good. He's working through some slight issues right now with that on his end, but that is impending. It's coming soon, and dual data extraction is on its way. And very soon you will be able to. What that means is basically you can have two independent reviewers do independent data extractions, and you can have a third party, someone else on your team, adjudicate those two decisions in there. And I think I shared what that design looked like in one of our earlier live streams. You can go check that out if you want to see what that looks like. But please tell you, 2 weeks later, it's on its way. We're almost done with it. So we do try to move as quickly as we can. We are at a little over half an hour, so I think we should call it. Ranita, I don't know how you feel, but I think we are set. We will be back next week though, and yeah, we'll be back right here, ready to answer your questions, ready to help you do better research in our platform.
It actually looks like we have a question, Jeff.
Oh, okay. Let me hear it. We'll stick around for as long as you have questions. How about that? Let's see here. Yeah. So Elizabeta, I think that's Elizabeta, our friend Elizabeta in Poland. She says, "Do I understand correctly that I can set up a monthly automatic search of the PubMed database, but not, for example, Embase? So to maintain the LSR standard, I have to search databases other than PubMed every month. Correct?" Yes. As of right now, that is correct. There are two databases for which we have an API that can call out automatically to that database. From there on, yes, other databases outside of that, you would have to use a RIS file, and if you wanted to update it monthly or quarterly or whatever, you would have to import that search manually. So it is an extra step. Of course, we have some other tools to help you out. So let's say you import a RIS file, right? And it was based upon that same search. My understanding, Ranita, please, I'm not a researcher. Kick in if I'm misstating this, but we have auto deduplication, right? So if you were to import the same RIS file and only two studies were different, like you just made it a part of your routine, and you were to say, okay, I'm going to hit export on this RIS file. I'm going to bring all of those records into Nested Knowledge. What would happen at that stage is that the auto deduplication feature would kick in, and you would have you would have just those two records, or just those three records, whatever was new out of that search. Is that right, Ranita? Am I misrepresenting this? How this works?
That's exactly right, Jeff. And that's what I would recommend doing. If you have a large number of studies, I would recommend doing that. But the other thing you can do is, if you don't want to upload an RS file all the time,
Great point.
you can also just filter to, like, let's say anything that came out within the last month. So filter it in Embase or Scopus and just say, I only want to see things that are from, June 1st to June 30th. And then if there's only like 2 studies or 1 study, you can just go ahead and put in a PubMed ID or
Manually import
UI
them. Sure.
and add them manually. So
So
depending on how many studies you've got, either you can do that RIS upload, and that will only it'll end up in the same thing, but it shouldn't be too much work, just depending on how many studies have been new in the last month.
right. Not ideal. Admittedly, not ideal. We're working on more APIs behind the scenes, trying to get those bridges up so that we can pull in as much literature from all of those different disparate sources, and pull them in as easily and as quickly and as in an automated a fashion as possible. For now, that's the workaround, and that's how you get really anything into our software. I've actually used our software to do non-clinical research. Believe it or not, I've tried it out. It does work. You have to kind of hack around, but you can actually import any PDF into our software and take advantage of our annotation tools. You can use keyword highlighting and stuff. So, back in college, I was a lit major. You could do like English literature research in our software. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying it's possible, right? Okay.
And I will say, Jeff, too, like I finished a master's program recently, and for my global development classes, that was, you import, like, let's say a WHO document or a country document, and
that's the real power of it. Yeah,
exactly. It's a really powerful to be able to do that, because let me say, some of those documents are very long and have a lot of really good information that's hard to categorize any other way than just tagging the document. So.
Conference proceedings, gray lit, whatever you want, you can bring it into our software and use it that way. It's not always going to be automated though, right? Because those are obviously sources that are coming from wherever, and that's the flexibility. But also, we're certainly working on those features, and we will continue to work on those features and make them better. And hopefully, it makes your life easier. That's the goal. Makes your research better and makes your research process quicker and faster and more accurate, right? Yeah, unless there are other questions, I think we should call it right here, right now. What do you say, Ranita?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we'll see you right back here next week. Thank you so much. Have a good one.